Welcome to the California Emerging Technology Fund inaugural conversation on the quest for digital equity. Today, we have two trailblazing members of the Federal Communications Commission as our first guests. The Federal Communications Commission is responsible for overseeing telecom communications policy, internet policy promulgated by the Congress, regulating the telecommunication industry, proceeding on the mergers and acquisitions, corporate consolidations among companies, and overseeing the Universal Services Fund, which provides a big pot of money for reimbursements between companies, E-rate for schools and libraries, also provides funding for the Healthcare Connect Fund, and our guests also have been champions of lifeline programs for both telephone and internet customers. So welcome, Rachelle Chong and Mignon Clyburn.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. The Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, is comprised of 5 members. By law, 2 of those 5 members must be from the opposite party of the president. Rachelle Chong was appointed by Bill Clinton in 1994 as a Republican member of the Federal Communications Commission. She is from Stockton, California. Rachelle and I are both Valley girls from the great San Joaquin Valley of California, a Phi Beta Kappa graduate from UC Berkeley, an attorney. She became the first Asian American to serve on the FCC. She later was appointed to the California Public Utilities Commission in 2005. Mignon Clyburn was appointed to the FCC in 2009 by President Obama. Previously, she had served for 11 years on the South Carolina Public Services Commission. And prior to that, Mignon was a very successful businesswoman running her family-owned newspaper in historical Charleston. Obviously, both of these women have extraordinary credentials, are brilliant and accomplished, but there's always a backstory to how they get appointed to anything. And so we want to start by asking each of them to tell that backstory. So Rachelle Chong, we want to sort of pull back the veil of the Beltway and what goes on in DC and understand, so why did President Clinton recognize your talents and brilliance and appoint you?
I think that I was the compromised candidate. Is what really is the bottom line. They were looking for a Republican to fill a seat at the commission. It was empty. And it took them a long time. They had put apparently 5 women's names up who were Republicans, but they weren't, quote, real Republicans, according to Senator Dole, who at that time was the minority leader. And so he refused them all. And so they had to launch a nationwide search. So they were calling around, and here was the criteria. This is the best part. They wanted a, quote, real Republican, preferably a lawyer, preferably a woman, preferably a minority, and he or she had to know what the internet was, which at that time we charmingly called it the information superhighway.
Yep.
So they did outreach, and Ginger Liu was the transition team member on the Clinton team. She went to small business later as a deputy secretary. She reached out to the Asian Bar Association in the Bay Area, and they went through their directory, and in the back under communications, there was only one person, so it was me. And so she called me and she said, "Are you interested in this?" It's like, "Are you kidding me? I used to practice in front of the FCC as a young lawyer. Of course I'm interested. In fact, I think I'm qualified." So I got my name at least in the mix, and then I was very ballsy. I was coming back from a conference in Florida, and I thought, I'll just go by DC and go see Senator Dole's office. So I went in there without a meeting. I just barreled into his office, and it just so happened his chief of staff was standing at the reception desk. And I said to them, "I'm Rachelle Chong. I'm being considered for the FCC." And he looks at me like, "What?" But he brought me in and asked me a bunch of hard questions about fairness doctrine and things like that. And I must have done okay, because he about a week later, I got a call from the transition team, and they said, "We don't know why, but you're at the top of Senator Dole's list, so you can come out and interview with us and meet the vice president." So that's how it happened.
So you met Al Gore if you went out to talk to the vice president who talked about the information superhighway. A good lesson learned from that is put yourself forward. Even if you've got immense qualifications, somebody has to be your champion and it has to begin with you. And so that's a great story. Mignon, I knew about you because as a commissioner in South Carolina, you were involved with our commissioners from California. And Mike Peavy always talked about Mignon Clyburn, and you've got to talk to Mignon because I can be pretty persistent around issues. And then you were appointed by President Obama. And I'm just interested in how that all came together and how the conversation went down.
Well, thank you for allowing me to join you today. I want to bring up 3 quick points, and feel free, to weigh in. One of the things that Rachelle brought up, her interaction on the Hill. I want everybody to know how things are actually done, regardless of who's in front. If you go back to the days, the Clinton days, when things were a lot tense during the impeachment moment, there was a compromise that came out of all of that. And one of those things that honestly has influenced and continues to influence who's appointed and how they're appointed to the FCC is the fact that the leadership in the Senate, on both political sides, they have a say as to who the commissioners are. And so they usually offer up a suite of individuals for consideration. That was a part of the compromise. So yes, the president usually is the sole person that will choose a chair when it comes to presidential appointments, but these boards and commissions, often the names come up and through the leadership in the Senate. So, that's a part of history I think worth noting. My journey was interesting, and a lot of the details, Rachelle knows more details. I decided not to get, I didn't want to know a lot of the details, but let me say that I tried it twice. Back in, I think it was 2002 or so, there was an open seat on the FCC. Someone mentioned my name because at the time, if we all go back, there was a sort of a understood designated seat for a state commissioner. So if you were a state commissioner and had good relationships, you had an advantage, back in those days. And so my name was circulated. I went up and spoke to, one very prominent senator. I could tell at the time that, it was just a courtesy meeting. So I went back home, got the confirmation that, now is not your time. Fast forward to the political dynamics of the Obama administration and the significance of South Carolina, what role it played to propel him to the White House, and not only propel him once, but help to help twice, helped him to get reelected. The fact of the matter is these are political jobs. And the relationships you have with politicians, they absolutely matter. I wish I could say to you that your ability, your know-how, and the rest of that was first. It is not first. It is definitely second, third, or fourth, depending on the dynamic. So I always say to people that if you want consideration in Washington, D.C., or in the state houses or in these boards and commissions, you have to be known and connected. You have to, meander and interact with individuals. And yes, you should know what you're seeking. But number one, it's the political connections. I have one or two, as you may know, and all of those dynamics definitely helped in the process. But I will say this was my second go round. And so, that helped too, to know that, for those number of years, that I was still a viable candidate, and the rest, as they say, is evolving history.
Thank you so much, Mignon. And I might say that you, as the acting chair of the Federal Communications Commission in 2013, will always be for the California Emerging Technology Fund, our chair, who
Thank
put forward as a top priority getting all Americans connected, particularly low-income households. So you're always our star. And let's just, for everybody in our audience, underscore the role of South Carolina, not only historically, but this year. And Mignon referenced one or two connections. Her family is historical in South Carolina, in Charleston. Her father is Jim Clyburn, who serves in Congress and was quite instrumental as the primaries unfolded. So with all of that, you both have been champions of digital equity for the California Emerging Technology Fund that was directed to be established by the California Public Utilities Commission. CETF, that name was even selected by Susan Kennedy and Mike Peavy, who was president at the time. They envisioned a need for an entity that had the mission to go close the digital divide in California. And while we were directed to be established by the CPUC, they have no role in our operation. We are a not-for-profit at the specification of the CPUC, although by state law, we report to the legislature through the CPUC. When we got that assignment, and at the time, I was Secretary of Business, Transportation, and Housing for the state of California. I was recruited by the first founding board of directors to come and stand up the organization. Literally the first day I was on the job, I got on a plane and I went to see Susan Walters and said, please join me in this journey. And then later other team members came into our staff. What we always knew is, although the word broadband was given to us as a mission, we defined it in a very generic way, that broadband is a term for high-speed internet infrastructure, including both wireline and wireless. And that we were committed not just to bridge the digital divide, that was the common term in those days, but to close the digital divide. As all of our work has unfolded for 14 years, we have come to understand that there is an imperative for digital equity. In fact, we call digital equity a 21st century civil right. So we are very, very focused on accomplishing not just the deployment of infrastructure, but getting all Californians online. So I want to really start with the conversation around, what does digital equity mean to you? And Mignon, let's start with you. I can recall with great fondness sitting in your office as you were presiding over everything, and we would have wonderful conversations about how to accomplish internet lifeline, how to actually get the funding for all Americans to be connected. So digital equity, what does that mean to you, Mignon?
It is a quest. It is a very precise and intentional way of narrowing divides when it comes to 21st century tools and opportunities. You remember the arguments of the day. It was not uncommon for someone to say that broadband is a luxury. No, not everybody, everybody doesn't want it and everybody doesn't need it. Or they can go to the library, or they can do all of these things. They don't necessarily need this in their homes. Why are you speaking about getting computers to children? Why are you talking about wiring homes so seniors can have the opportunity to take care of the loneliness factor, or to be able to apply for jobs and opportunities inside of your home? So not so very long ago, this was not a priority for many. But this pandemic has exposed a lot of our faults and weaknesses. And one that is glaring is that the primary tool for addressing what the major challenges are in front of us, be it continual education, healthcare opportunities without risking your exposure or anybody else's exposure to you in person, finding though that next job, reskilling, that at the foundation of it all is connectivity. What we also know is not all households or individuals are created equal. So when we talk about equity, that is a word in terms of its application that is different for every household, is different for every individual. And if I am economically well-heeled, I'm going to be all right. But for equity to occur, those who are on the opposite or on the not so wonderful side of the economic divide, we need to bridge partnerships. The establishment of your entity was critical in recognizing that there has to be a public-private role for all of us to play in order to address those inequities. So when we talk about equity and when we talk about digital equity, we have to know that if we do a better job at conquering and addressing that, all of the other equities will be flattened. I really think when you talk about the quest for digital equity, those are four important words, because if we continue on that journey of conquering those inequities, there are a lot of other things that will be better controlled, better managed, and we would have a more, not only a more connected future, but more prosperous future.
Thank you. We couldn't agree more. And we also have really experienced in California with the pandemic what we now call a digital cliff. We see people who are just falling off into deeper poverty, greater isolation because they're not connected. As you said, it is an underpinning, the availability, the ability to connect to the internet is essential infrastructure today. And Rachelle, you were at the FCC a whole decade before Mignon started serving. And those were days in which the information superhighway was, we would pull coaxial cable through schools. I actually did that with the vice president and the president in a school in Contra Costa County. And so I'm wondering, what has been that evolution of the thinking to get to this concept that Mignon just really so eloquently explained about digital equity?
I've had the pleasure of starting this issue, I think, really early. I joined the commission in '94. And at that time, really, the information superhighway concept was more about, let's get libraries to developing countries. Let's get access to telehealth to rural, remote areas. That was the concept that we had back then. But I agree with you. It was really felt that it was like a luxury service. And so we were more focused on the pipes, how do we set the right economic investment scheme so that people would build these types of things. And frankly, a lot of the fight back then was over, do we regulate them like telephone? And thank heavens, we made a really important decision, probably one of the most important I ever made in my life, to not regulate them like a telephone system, but to leave them as an information service. Now, those are fighting words right now with net neutrality, but let me tell you, back then, that was the most important decision we made, because it encouraged Silicon Valley to spend the money to develop and connect people. Now, fast forward, when I got to the PUC, then there was much more internet, but it was clearly like a luxury service, similar to what Mignon said. And when you looked at it, I remember very distinctly a unnamed AT&T lobbyist, who Sonny, would walk around to all the legislators to say, oh, those people in the country, they don't need a Jaguar, they could just get a Ford in terms of internet service. And it drove me crazy, because it really pointed out that the people who were building the internet thought that it was okay that disenfranchised, disadvantaged communities got worse service, frankly. And I always was outraged by that and thought that was just wrong. So now fast forward, it turns out we were all right all along because the pandemic hits, everybody needs internet. Now, I will tell you, the good news is the internet did not go down when COVID hit. So people did some things right. But on the other hand, we are all aware of communities right now that don't have adequate internet for today's uses. And that's where the struggle is now. So what I just wanted to say at the end is what this means is we need some really different thinking in Washington about A, funding for infrastructure, and B, the way that we run our universal service funding program. It's so outdated, it's ridiculous. And we are starting an ad hoc working group right now in Washington to address the contribution factor. And in summary, what that means is the revenues of internet are not contributing towards the universal service surcharge. And that means the base that is interstate that is assessed at the federal level is falling. And it's interesting, you think it's, oh, there's less long distance. It turns out the reason it's falling is that the bulk of the base is now wireless and people are using more data on their wireless. You know, who calls anyone anymore? My kids never call me, they text me, right? So there's just a tiny bit of voice left in that mobile bucket, and it's causing the interstate fund to go down very severely. So we're working on it right now, but honestly, the way to fix it is a federal legislative change. So I think the main battlefield for digital equity right now is in Washington.
Sonny, I couldn't agree more. And unfortunately, people have a tendency to take the political posturing and use certain buzzwords like not taxing the internet and the like. Now, I know you don't really want to start, a fight today, but I have to point out that there are some very real barriers, most of them political, that are standing in the way of these reforms. There are some, I think very Neanderthal thinking when it comes to looking at the universal service programs and other entities that have a role in this, because these silos honestly don't make any sense. A lot of them don't make sense. What's the goal here? How do we achieve? How does government, that is supposed to be the backstop when markets aren't working properly, how can it and should it be better positioned to meet our digital critical connected needs? And so I'm hoping almost for a Thanksgiving miracle coming up, because we really need to put politics, leave it at the front door, and really talk about exactly what it is we need, exactly how much it would cost, and exactly how we could spread out that economic burden through different agencies, through different objectives and the like. The common denominator is broadband. The common denominator is the internet. That's the base, but it fuels that germinates, and that helps to cultivate and expand all of the other lines of interest and efforts and opportunities. But until we put politics at the front door and say, this is an unsustainable way that we are funding currently, this is not a right way to administer these programs. Until that happens, honestly, this is a collision waiting to happen. And, we can continue to punt, but not so very, in the not so distant future, we're going to pay a heavy price if we're not proactive.
We are very focused on being proactive. We literally quote in our latest progress report, it's time for good trouble. In full disclosure, Rachelle Chong is our special counsel. She has to represent the California Emerging Technology Fund in our quest for digital equity. And we state explicitly that the digital divide is just another manifestation of the economic divide that is rooted in systemic institutionalized racism. And if we do not understand that there is a whole set of interrelated factors that prevent low-income households from getting online, we call it the wall of poverty, that there has to be not only intervention with infrastructure, but also services, policy, extraordinary efforts working with the residents in low income and digitally disadvantaged communities. Most recently, I've had the opportunity to work with Julie Meyer Wright from California on the Council on Competitiveness. That's very broad, nationwide, bipartisan, looking at exactly what you said, Mignon, about infrastructure being that common denominator and an underpinning. And the marker that we have put down that I've advised them is it's $100 billion investment, $100 billion investment from the federal government to invest in getting all of the country connected and doing that in partnerships with states. So both of you, I want to ask, how do we overcome the politics? What is the path forward? What are those barriers to closing the digital divide? Mignon.
The barriers are politics. The barriers are sometimes a very myopic point of view from the regulator, from those legislators that see the world through their lens, but often fail to see the world through the lens of those who live a few hundred miles away. Rachelle would not state it that way, but I feel emboldened, to be able to do so. That is a very siloed, myopic way of delivering, of thinking, very much wedded to what has happened in the past and who has delivered things in the past. When we talk about these 21st century opportunities, when we look at how we are applying these technologies and leveraging the tools that we have, it's so interesting that we can be, creative and embrace a lot of those luxuries. But when it comes to regulating and legislation, we have a tendency to stay, wedded to the past. So, to me, it is primarily that mindset, that unwillingness to be disruptive, as you like to say in California, a lot. And I really think from my experiences and interactions, those are the 1, 2, or 3, and they're interrelated, challenges that we have.
And Rachelle Chong, you are the mother of the California Advanced Services Fund in California. You came up with this really brilliant insight of how to take what was a telephony subsidy fund and devote it to the internet. It is the primary tool that we have in the state to support deployment into communities where the marketplace hasn't operated. If you could comment on, so what do we need from the federal government in order to have the resources to partner in California? And what are the congressional changes in law that would empower the FCC to be able to do what we all have just said needs to be done?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the CASF, because what I saw happening when I was a PUC commissioner was market failure. We had plenty of decent infrastructure in the urban areas, but in the rural, remote, and tribal areas, we clearly had market failure, and it was economic. There's just no business case that you can make. And in my career, I did work for a very large cable provider, and I can tell you absolutely this is how they make a decision. It's a business case. So what I thought we could do was to figure out some way to have a fund that could make up for market failure. And we came up with the CASF fund. And it's not a perfect fund in retrospect, but at the time it was the first time I think a state had taken a high-cost telephone infrastructure fund and converted a little tiny piece of it over to internet infrastructure. We did it at that time trying to prioritize unserved areas over underserved, and that distinction has kind of blurred now. But the whole idea was that we needed to have a structure to make up for the failure in market forces. Now, fast forwarding to now, I think it's become a little bit of a battlefield in terms of this fund, because as you have seen, some of the incumbents have been gaming the Sacramento game, and they're very good at it. A lot of them have been there for many years. They give a lot of money, they have relationships, and it's been really hard for the rural and disadvantaged communities to be heard in Sacramento to make sure they get what they need in terms of the CASF. So I do think it's been an important fund because it's devoted hundreds of millions of dollars into the infrastructure. We got a lot of the low-hanging fruit at this point. Now we're down to the hard parts. A couple of strategic corridors like the Northwest, the Northeast, and I think Central Valley still has work to be done. So now let's look at the federal. What I do like about the federal is there have been a number of funds that are being used to fill some of these spots. And so I'm thinking, for example, of the Connect America Fund and now the Rural Deployment Opportunity Fund. And of course, there's been some grants by the Rural Utility Service over at Department of Agriculture. So how do you become competitive to get those funds? You know, part of the problem is that California is seen as being very urban, and the definition of rural, it made it hard for us to get a lot of the RUS money, frankly. In terms of CAF, that was directed entirely to the incumbent, and that we had to kind of pause our CASF grants because the incumbents got these federal funds, and then in the bill, the AB 1665, there was a pause. And I think that pause was dangerous because unfortunately there were a lot of rural areas that it looked like they were going to get CAF funds, but when the actual build out occurred, a lot of locations did not get built out. And so those are very frustrated people at this point because they waited. So now we finally have the ability to have some independents come in and build. And I'm pleased to say that my understanding is we do have a number of California ISPs that have applied into the RDOF auction. It's going on right now as we speak. And I'm excited about it because I do think that we have an opportunity to fill some spots in California that haven't gotten funds yet. But there is a possibility that the PUC, they have a rulemaking out that will allow some of the CASF funds to be used as a 10% match for RDOF. So what does that mean pragmatically? It means that the bidders can stay in longer and bid longer because they know they've got another 10% in CASF funds. Number two, it means that they can take some costs that aren't covered by RDOF and apply the CASF funds. Similar to what we did back in the ARA days, where CASF was used as a additional pot of money for those applicants. That helped Digital 395, for example, get done, the Eastern Sierra project. I think that that could be very positive. And maybe, as Sunny would say, we'll get our fair share of what California should get out of some of these federal funds.
Thanks, Rachelle. Yeah.
If I, yes, Sunny, if you will allow me to weigh in, you know, one of the things I remember a few years ago, I had a wonderful visit at, I believe it was a middle school in Los Angeles, and Rachelle might remember this. I think she might have dropped by. I remember visiting our friends at Annenberg and not really going that far away. But it was like light years away because that beautiful, very mature, meaning on the older end and by way of infrastructure schools, had as many negative challenges when it came to connecting it as some of our rural communities, meaning that old building could not hold, support, and withstand some of the critical infrastructure needed to connect those children. I say that to say this. Now I'm from a rural state, so I am not throwing anyone under the bus. The digital divide is as much an urban problem as it is a rural problem. And if we simply have a one-dimensional attack or address to this issue, you know, pretending that is just a rural problem, we will not truly connect America. That's just it. Now, one of the things that John Salad and I talked about, John Salad is a senior fellow at Benton. We penned an op-ed and we talked about and challenged Congress to establish a permanent broadband credit that would be $50 a month more on Native nations to for those to address the affordability gap that the current programs are not doing. We have a Lifeline program that honestly is on life support. But this type of program will, at least in the cities, I think the average monthly broadband cost might be about $60. At least this will do something like this would really make a substantial difference closing the affordability gap here. Digital equity programs need to be expanded and endorsed and supported by members of Congress. These monies should go to community colleges, other anchored institutions, nonprofits, again, Alaska Native, tribal, Native Hawaiian lands, and yes, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and the like. Because that is needed. Those types of wraparound partnerships are needed. Digital skills enhancements. We need to be, I think all of this should be a part of an infrastructure bill that we've been waiting for like 4+ years, to be honest with you. What happened to infrastructure that was supposed to be done, years ago? All of this needs to be wrapped into an infrastructure bill because quite frankly, it is availability. We do have redlining when it comes to the infrastructure bill. We do have gaps in the intercities, in suburban communities, and of course in rural communities that those needs should be addressed. So Congress as the appropriator could direct funding, but those of us at the state and local level need to partner to ensure that the resources flow to where it's needed the most.
So Mignon, it does require congressional action to give to the FCC the authority you're talking about. Is that, I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
There as well, there's some of that. Absolutely, there is some of that, but it just depends. There are a number of pots, there are a number of opportunities. Yes, the most efficient way, I believe, if we were to set up a permanent broadband credit, I believe the most efficient agency to do it with USAC's help would be the FCC. I really do, in terms of administering. Then we have to get to the politics and the rest of it. So we need to look at existing institutions and say, how do we best execute what we know right now are the issues and challenges we have, and make the regulatory changes, make the legislative changes needed in order to connect our communities. The way it's structured in the pure sense right now, the way it's siloed right now, it is not, we're appropriating a lot of money. But here is what I know, and I don't want you to get in trouble by saying it. I'll go ahead and take the heat for you. We can continue to allocate these billions of dollars that are going to flow in our communities, but if we do not ensure that they are allocated and spent effectively in a sustainable manner to ways and places supporting and enabling new and existing players to be a part of the solution, we're going to have the same conversation in 3 to 5 years. We would have spent billions of dollars and have the same proportion of those on the wrong side of the digital divide if we do not recalibrate our way of thinking.
We agree with you. CETF received 2 grants from NTIA for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And as a result of that, we were invited to submit testimony to a Senate subcommittee in 2013. And one of our recommendations was you have to, as Congress, declare that it is the policy of the nation to get everybody connected and to cross-cut the policies from one silo to another, from all departments needing to have a common purpose, that it be infused into the Health and Human Services Agency, into Housing and Urban Development, into the Department of Transportation, into EPA, with a place to administer the subsidies for both the infrastructure deployment and the adoption of the technology. And we focus on the FCC as that institution to be able to do that. So I think we would want to revisit with you what federal policy that has to be enacted by Congress that says cut through the silos and get the job done and focus on the outcomes. So could you talk about, as the champion of Lifeline Internet, when you were the acting chair, I remember those conversations in your office about how are we going to get this done? And you said Lifeline is on life support. We all worked really, really hard on broadband. What do you think the FCC needs to do to get a truly effective Lifeline program for the internet back up and operating?
I think we should revisit the reforms that were teed up prior to the change in administration. Take the credit. I don't even care about the credit. Take it, it's yours. Institute those reforms that would allow the program to mature like the other USF programs have matured. It would allow for it to attract innovative providers. There were providers that were teed up to directly focus on healthcare needs, directly focus on those students that did not have broadband connectivity at home. There were providers that had innovative products and services that if they were allowed at that point in time to advance their business plans with broken down silos so they didn't have to go state by state by state, which is an expensive and long and exhaustive process. I am willing to bet my next breath that some of the issues and challenges that we have now in terms of broadband connectivity to school-age children who cannot afford a monthly service and did not have a Chromebook or a laptop or anything at home, we would have been in a better, smoother place. So that's why I go back to the politics and the posturing and people fixated on whose idea it was. There were ways for us to preemptively fix, to reform this program. The only universal service program administered at the FCC that directly addresses the affordability challenge. $9.25 per month from the federal government. California has done an awesome job by augmenting that figure for a provider with your own state funding, because you recognize $9.25 is going to probably get you de minimis service. And so we need to recognize what are the goals and objectives and get away. I know I sound like a broken record, but the politics and the posturing is really stopping us from advancing to the next level. And it really cost us a lot of valuable time pre-COVID. And honestly, if there's anything that haunts me in this process, it is that we could have done a lot of fixing before this pandemic. And my friends, and some of them are my friends, who kept saying, don't worry about it, they can go to the library. Newsflash, the library is closed. They can barely, students can barely go to school. Seniors can barely get to their doctor's appointment. Those without cars are too afraid to get on our metros and our buses. Look at what we could have done if we were to allow that program and others that could have been complementary, that we could have developed, that directly addressed the affordability gap, that directly address the availability gap when it comes to connectivity, when it comes to those on the cusp, because there are people that make 1 cent more than who would qualify for Lifeline that are struggling hard too in order to maintain a connection. So if I sound passionate about this, I am. If I sound disappointed about the wasted time and opportunities, I am. But let's learn from that. And then let's move forward in a way that puts aside whatever your notions about whatever you call Lifeline, a very politically incorrect way, and see if that program has a way, since it's already set up, to be a part of the solution when it comes to narrowing or that quest, as you said, for digital equity.
Well, you keep that passion. It is exactly what the Honorable John Robert Lewis said about making good trouble. You remind me, you visited John Muir Middle School with our senior vice president, Susan Walters. Now, that is a school in South Los Angeles, in the heart of a very low income community, a low performing school that we've turned around with our school to home program. And I mention that because every child has an ability to exceed beyond where we have provided opportunities in these low-income neighborhoods. The day before, Chairman Ajit Pai, current FCC Chairman Ajit Pai, visited the San Fernando Institute of Applied Media. You're from two different parties, came back to the FCC and reported that you both supported the kind of success that you were seeing with school to home. We need to overcome the politics and not allow any person, any party to have a veto on the future of this country or on the ability of any person to reach their full potential. So I really want to applaud that. I also note that you mentioned that John Sallet, you co-authored an op-ed. The Benton Institute for Broadband just released a report on broadband in the 2020s. Both you and Rachelle are quoted. Rachelle, you are quoted about leadership. It is always around leadership that something happens. So please, in this passion that you share with Mignon and representing CETF that is always into what I think is good trouble and taking on the status quo, talk about the federal laws that you think need to be passed to empower the FCC to help us continue what we need to do in California that would make a huge difference to get everybody online.
I think the first thing that I would say is we need to immediately move to get affordable broadband to people that can't afford it. As Mignon said, we have about $60 to $70 as the average retail rate. And right now in California, our Lifeline program is $9.25 from the feds and then $14.25 from California. And if you add that up, that's not enough to make broadband affordable. So what I would like to see done is there should be a mandatory Lifeline offer by all ISPs, not just wireless ISPs, but also wireline. So that would be the telcos and the cable players. I think that would go a long way to make affordability happen. And you can do it a number of ways. If they want to take federal grants for infrastructure, then they should be required to have an affordable rate. And there's been an affordability rulemaking in California that has a formula that could set what affordability means depending on where you are. So it's doable. The second thing I would say is we have to solve this contribution issue that I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. That is fraught with terrible politics. There's no question. But I am very encouraged. We have a working group now that includes all the players, including the very noisy player that claims it's a tax on the internet. And we are showing with data where this current system takes us, and it takes us to nowhere. So we are now really bearing down on how do we change it? Should it be a number system? Should it be a connection system? You know, we are really working through it and showing people what the data really brings us to. And I feel like, you know, we're making some progress, and that's very important for the affordability digital equity piece that we're seeing. I think the final thing I would say is we have to figure out some way to get this out of the political arena. This is now broadband, a utility. Everybody has to have it. And that's what the pandemic showed us. So I think now we have to really start moving from the broadband is a, it's not a utility type of concept to this is just like water and electricity. And we have to find a way to get it to everybody, however that is. And we have to break through all these really old fashioned telecom regulatory structures to see that vision. I think, frankly, for the first time, I have seen promise that this could happen right now with the pandemic. It looks like the pandemic, unfortunately, is with us for a long time. So I do think the continuing emergency selfishly helps people see what really needs to be done in this arena. So I have hope. I'm as passionate as Clyburn, but I'm really focused on how do we fix the law? How do we get people together? Because that's what I see as the problem. And she is absolutely right that politics has messed this lifeline issue up terribly. And I do want to give my esteemed fellow commissioner a huge prop. She did something that I felt was really important when she was a commissioner, and she reformed the prison payphone telephone system. And I want to say that was a really important thing to do, because we had families of prisoners that were being taken advantage of by telephone companies that serve these prisons with, exclusive or semi-exclusive contracts. And I felt that was one of those digital equity pieces that people didn't really think about for a long time, and she got it done. So a few props to my friend.
And Rachelle, thank you for referencing that accomplishment by Mignon. You have been representing CETF before the California Public Utilities Commission on several proceedings, including all the corporate consolidations. Most recently in the Lifeline proceeding, we have made the statement that the revenue base to provide Lifeline has to be broadened. We've engaged in that conversation. We have a mature internet infrastructure and industry in this country, and it is time that we have to have that conversation about everybody being a part of the solution. We also, because you have to represent us, make it very clear that we are advocates for public-private partnership. We want to see sincere partnerships with the industry. We underscore the word sincere because we can't come up with a better word to say if we're both genuinely committed to digital equity, then it is in the public interest to have industry step up and do what they can do with innovation and do it efficiently, and to work with government and nonprofits, because we have to act together in the public interest. So in the conversation around what is the role of the internet service providers to be a partner, how should we look at the affordable offers that we have all negotiated with them? Commissioner Clyburn presided over several of those corporate consolidations when Comcast first offered Internet Essentials, but today Comcast requires a family who now falls into poverty and qualifies for Comcast Internet Essentials to get off their market rate subscription for 90 days before they can sign up for Internet Essentials. Charter, when buying Time Warner Cable, made a great commitment, entered into an MOU with us. They require a household who becomes poor and qualifies for their Internet Assist program to get off of their service for 30 days. That's just not acceptable. I know it was you, Mignon, that when AT&T bought DirecTV, that you negotiated pretty fiercely to get an affordable offering, their AT&T Access program. And Rachelle, so you had to take us through many of these proceedings, in fact, reopening before the PUC when we didn't get compliance from one company. How do we craft this relationship of partnerships and nest it with Lifeline? What is the role of the ISP? So let's start with you, Rachelle. I'm going to come to you, Mignon. I want you to both tell the ISPs what it is we need and why it's going to be in the interest of the country for us all to work together. It's going to grow our economy. The data is clear. We have these incredibly ridiculous and stupid, short-sighted conversations. How do we get through it? Rachelle.
Well, I think one way to do it is we have been walking softly, but carrying a big stick at CETF in the corporate consolidations. When we started, they made fun of us. Like, are you kidding me? This is information service. You can't make us do anything in that area. But we did because they wanted their corporate consolidation, and we knew this was an important public benefit that we could get 3 commissioners to vote for. So now I will tell you that because we have intervened in 5 corporate consolidations over the years, costing CETF hundreds of thousands of dollars, frankly, I will tell you that now ISPs see us coming and they know what they need to do. They have to make a public benefit commitment to an affordable broadband plan. And now recently some infrastructure commitments. But what I don't like about it is these things end. All of those affordable offer commitments end in 3 years typically. Sometimes they extend it, like Comcast did extend it. Frontier has extended only under duress, let me add, which cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to get. But anyway, we did do it. But what I don't like about it is it's up to their discretion. And these offers do often require only specific programs. It has to only be a new consumer. So people have to get off to get on. I mean, this is crazy. So what I've now started to realize is that what we need to do is we need to have an affordable rate that's part of the Lifeline program, mandated somehow. We got to figure it out. And so we've become CETF active in the California Lifeline program. I mean, we've been there in the last rulemaking for a number of years. Senior VP Susan Walters has worked on it. And we've been trying to point out what's wrong. But this year, I really feel like with the pandemic, we have a new chance to really make a difference. And so we have been advocating at the PUC that there must be a mandated wireline affordable offer. Of course, the ISPs that are incumbents, you know who they are, they have all said, oh, well, that's illegal. You guys don't regulate information service here at the Cal PUC, so go away. We'll sue you. That's what they always say. We'll sue you. Well, we'll see you in court, right? So that is one problem. And so we have to overcome that. We've been trying to work with them, but they always just default back to, well, we'll sue you because the PUC has no jurisdiction over this, even though they know it's the right thing to do. And in fact, most of them have some kind of affordable program, although they don't market it. It's hard to find. The data is not adequate in those plans. So another big issue we've been bringing to the PUC is adequate data in these Lifeline plans. Big fight at the federal level right now, big fight in California. We've been spending a lot of money going after the data piece. The other piece is people need family plans. And right now, Lifeline only funds one line to the house. So we've been working on making sure it could be a hotspot so that people could share it, that it could be a tablet device so that people could share it, and those types of things. And in California, I will say, for the first time, the PUC has proposed a quote, family line. So you could buy one line at a regular rate and then have the ability at a Lifeline rate to buy a second line if you need it, which could be a Wi-Fi hotspot or a tablet, so that other people in the family, such as children or a spouse, could do work at the same time. So I feel like we are making a lot of progress this particular year at the PUC, and we're trying to figure out how do we then take these reforms and move them up into the federal arena so that the FCC side has equal benefits. And we haven't played as much up at the FCC and Lifeline, but we are participating in this contribution ad hoc group to bring some of these ideas forward. And there's some good data that's coming out of this ad hoc group on contributions that I think we can bring back to California. So it's a big area of focus right now with the pandemic and the digital equity affordability piece that my colleague has brought up so forcefully. And it has to be done really this year. This is our one chance to do these affordability issues right now.
Mignon, you have sat with these companies. Please share your wisdom and insight and recommendations.
So listening to Rachelle, so rightly lay out the challenges and opportunities, there are two words that come to mind. One is sunlight, um, and one is opportunities, which was not my other word. But when you get of a certain age, you kind of remember the words, and if you don't write it down. But I'll just put it this way: sunlight is not only the best disinfectant, it highlights what what might have been in the shadows. And so when I say sunlight in this context, you rightly, Sunny, mentioned those negotiations where people like me sat in a room, and it wasn't a comfortable series of engagements. There is a certain newly retired executive senior vice president who will tell you that our conversations were not all lovely, or the decibel level had to change a little bit too. That when you have the negotiations or this, that, not all sides get exactly in all of what they want. And my second word I couldn't come up with was baton. It is necessary for us when a regulator has a finite ability to do certain things, no matter how passionate she is. But entities like yours, other organizations, we need to be a better recipient of that baton that is passed from the regulatory agency, to plug in these holes and these gaps. Because when it is presented to us on paper, it does not have that level of granularity. At the time, and I fought for this, and there was some change at the time. If you remember that Internet Essentials was only for those who qualified for free and reduced lunch. I immediately asked, what about those who make a penny more? What about those who don't really qualify, but they really don't have the disposable income to be able to afford? Not so long after that, there was a change within the system. So I say that to say, if that baton is properly passed and we properly accept that, then issues like that, and issues that you pointed out with and there was another issue, Rachelle would remember this, with Comcast, that you had to have almost pristine credit, a relationship with with the entity before you qualify for the program. And I'm going like, that makes absolutely no sense. If I had pristine credit in all of these resources, I would not need this platform or this opportunity, this program. So that was adjusted there. It could be adjusted with the other two examples that you pointed out. Okay, do we have a regulatory hook? Maybe not, but we do have other hooks if others take that baton and allow that sunlight to be placed on that. I am willing to guarantee, maybe not my next breath, but maybe a few more after that, that if enough attention is placed on that in the middle of a pandemic, there will be relaxation of some of those very troublesome quirks and requirements that in the age of need that make absolutely no sense. So we have to be a community of a whole, pick up that baton and do something with it and challenge those. Even if we don't have, quote unquote, the law behind us, we have the power of common sense and ensuring that the companies who say they're partly here to serve, that they fully take up the reins and show it by getting rid of rules that make absolutely no sense when we are trying to connect America.
And we need to keep looking for the partners or the people on our team to pass the baton to in this race for digital equity. And it is a marathon. I wish the marathon would be over, that I could see the finish line sooner rather than later. I do want to just recall one of my favorite moments with you. I always had great respect for your position and appreciation for your commitment. But I recall sitting in your office having hand carried a letter from the Chicana Latina Foundation and the Latino Community Foundation that spelled out the problems they were having trying to get residents in the Bay Area and the Salinas Valley connected to Internet Essentials. And they included farm worker families, and they were pointing out issues that they were running into when Comcast bought NBC Universal and voluntarily offered Internet Essentials. We applauded. We thought it was, huge that they had stepped forward. Cox Communications at the same time stepped forward with Connect to Compete that Chairman Janichowski had advocated. We were and continue to be champions of what all the internet service providers do. Step forward to be partners. We do need more hooks because we need that sincere partnership. What you did that day with at least 4 or 5 of your staff members sitting there is took that letter from the Chicana Latina Foundation and the Latino Community Foundation, and you read 3 pages, listened to me, and said, really? And then I know you had that conversation with Comcast executives. And I appreciate that responsiveness. You've always been good to listen to California, to come to California. Could you advise California or any other state, what do we do at this moment in time as a whole community that cares about digital equity to work at the federal level and specifically with the FCC?
You continue to challenge the agency to have nimble enough rules and regulations that will allow you to address the specific, precise, different needs that exist in your community. One size fits all means the rest of us are shoeless. and so, you've got to, from my perspective, to really bring that home, to challenge agencies like the FCC, to challenge members of Congress, especially the Commerce Committee that has oversight of the FCC, to really say, this is what we need. These are this is the runway that we need to do it. We could help to execute. We could administer. The FCC, I always, Rachelle knows I say this, we sit on Mount Olympus, they sit on Mount Olympus, and they hit a gavel, and then, here's policy, here are the rules, here are the regs. Back home in the States and at the local communities, you have to face, interact, and interpret, and sometimes implement, and sometimes try to course correct what the agency has done. There are ways to smooth that over. There are ways for us to sit down. That there's a public, a federal state construct with commissioners, state commissioners, and federal commissioners that I always thought needed to be broadened and strengthened and smoothed over. Instead of this tug of war between the two, we should be looking at ourselves better as partners. How do partners help each other? They address the issues, and they try to get to yes. This is I keep defaulting back to where we start, where it's been a recurring refrain. There's so many people who go out of their way to try not to get the yes. How can we do this? What can we change in order for us to work, smoothly, as to administer, to identify issues, to recognize that, California's issues are not South Carolina issues, that are not Georgia's issues. And we've got to recognize that. But there is a common denominator in refrain that needs to be fine-tuned in order for that to happen. So again, I put it back in the hands and the offices of the beholders. At every level, and to include Congress, from a town council to the White House. We've got to figure out in a nonpartisan, I'm not going to even say bipartisan, forget that. We're not going to have bipartisan, in a nonpartisan way, how we advance an ever-changing quest for digital equity. it is ever evolving. The standards are going to change. The need is going to change. The speeds have to change. The protections, need to keep up. Privacy, consumer protections, and the like. We haven't even talked about that, but as we move broader into telehealth and telemedicine, there is a lot of sensitive information that is traveling back and forth. I do not want everybody to know that I have an allergy. I don't want you to know that. Now, I might have just told you that, but that was voluntary. I don't want you to find that out and to use that information to leverage or try to make more money off of me, or to harm me, or to use my financial information in order to, again, either charge me more or to make me more vulnerable. So all of these things, in a regulatory gumbo, we need to address them. We need to harmonize them. We need to season them to the point where it's palatable to all, and that all elements in terms of our regulatory, dietary, and needs fix are recognized and are addressed. When it comes to this quest for digital equity.
I love the term regulatory gumbo. It's usually, such a jumbo mumbo in the regulatory arena. So let's do gumbo. I love that term. And you also so rightly pointed out, we need to get to the politics of yes. The politics of no is 10 times easier than the politics of yes.
Agreed.
And lobbyists are paid to say no. They're not paid to say yes, generally. It's to protect the interest in a short-sighted way. The conversation has to be elevated to the top levels of policymakers, the top levels of the companies, the chief executive officers. And the last time I looked, left, right wasn't the direction we were trying to go. We were trying to go forward. We need that enlightened front position. You've inspired us to lead. Rachelle has the responsibility to represent us legally. And I really want to turn back to you, Rachelle, to think about and advise not only CETF, but all of California in terms of the partnerships, what we need. How do we get to that conversation that ends up being yes?
At this time, I think we do have a lot of clout because of the pandemic. And what I would suggest is we should get the firepower of the governor's office and the agency leads to really sit down and make a partnership. I think at this moment, we actually have some opportunities. One of them is 5G. The wireless carriers want faster permitting for their 5G deployments, and that's an opportunity for us. So we could strike a deal where we have some faster permitting from people like Caltrans, et cetera, and we could exchange for that a committed wireline affordable offer by all of them. I'm sorry. Well, actually, yeah, both. Well, this is wireless. So we would have a long-term, we would try to probably for them get higher data caps, right? Because right now they're at about 3 gig for data, and we think it should be more like 5 to 8 if you look at the FCC studies on what data is necessary. Now, the wireline guys, they also are under pressure to build out. They have a lot of grants, they have a lot of commitments from mergers. I'm thinking about Frontier, for example. So they need some assistance too, getting through permitting and trying to get their grants from, for example, the PUC for CASF funds. I know Frontier's been very active with CASF. So there's some opportunities with them where we could assist them, we could support them, but in exchange for that, we would have a continuing affordable offer. We would have them, affirmatively do a lifeline offer that is permanent, not just a merger related one. So I do think this is an opportunity. The other area I see is the California Department of Education program, which is working with the California Teleconnect Fund. So Teleconnect Fund is getting 50% discount to schools who then allow students that don't have internet connectivity to get access. And then they're desperate for devices right now. they needed something like 700,000 devices, and we're not even close to getting that many. So I think we could have the governor and others put some pressure on some of these to help with the device issue. And that would help some of the short-term distance learning shortfalls that we have. But I think only someone like the governor or perhaps Amy Tong over at Department of Technology, those are the kinds of people that could try to get us all in one room, and maybe CBC, the California Broadband Council, could be a facilitator of trying to get some of that done. But I do think this moment in time is an opportunity. And I do think actually that Governor Newsom would engage in this. He's a young governor. He's got kids that are distance learning. I think he really gets it. And he could be very helpful in this kind of process.
And Governor Newsom did issue on August 14th, 2020, an executive order, Broadband for All. And he has charged the state agencies that serve on the California Broadband Council to prepare and submit an action plan by the end of December. The California Emerging Technology Fund by statute is also a member of the California Broadband Council. We are looking to have that conversation at the highest levels of leadership with the internet service providers. This is an open call and invitation with you too, to all of the ISPs, that their CEOs need to have the conversation to be able to work out that partnership that we're talking about. At the national level, we have the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, NARUC, that is also a forum that I hope we could work through. We've engaged in the past. I think we need to go back to that. That's how, of course, I knew about Mignon Clyburn. Also, Rachelle, you are vice chair of Shelby, of the Schools, Hospital, Library, Broadband Coalition. And that could also potentially be another avenue in to have these discussions with the top level of ISPs. Do you want to comment on the work of Shelby and what we might do also with NARUC, each of you?
Yeah, let me start with Shelby. It's been an honor to be the vice chair of Shelby. I voluntarily got involved with them because I felt there were a lot of important federal issues that impacted schools, libraries, and healthcare, and that it really folded nicely into the work that we do in California, including with CETF. So the good news is Shelby, as I mentioned, has been working on this contribution issue for the Universal Service Funds program. And then secondly, there's been a flurry of bills involving broadband since the pandemic began. And so poor John Windhausen over there has been, working probably 16 hours a day, trying to keep track of the bills, trying to advocate for schools, libraries, and healthcare to make sure that they're taken care of. And one of his biggest requests has been, adequate money, making sure that there's adequate money in the USF program. And then he's also been working on ensuring that there's enough infrastructure money, period. So we've been advocating for infrastructure bills, which would include large amounts of money for broadband. The other thing that he's doing, which I think we need to continue to pick up the baton out here in California, is there's no mapping of anchor institutions on the federal broadband map. It's crazy. So they have been insisting that it be included. Oh, my cat has joined us. So we are working on getting that done. And in California, we are also talking about getting the anchor institutions mapped. And that's something else that's very important.
Rachelle, I'm glad you mentioned mapping, because that is one of the other barriers that I failed to mention, because if we don't have accuracy by way of where is what, then we don't know exactly where to allocate, and we have to trust other providers that may put their interests above where the actual gaps are. Not trying to demonize anybody, but you've got your business plan, you got your framework, but there are severe pockets of need and of absence of connectivity, that if we don't have an accurate picture, if 1,000 people live in a particular census area, if I have broadband, however I have managed to do so, I won't speculate how I might have managed to do so, but if I have broadband, and 999 others do not, then that pocket is considered served because one person. That is ridiculous. That math doesn't work with anybody. And the mapping part, adequate maps, accurate, maps would address, that too. So I'm glad you brought up the mapping and what entities are excluded, because that is less than optimal, and we need to address that.
And Mignon, in California, the California Emerging Technology Fund has worked with a whole spectrum of 50 or more community organizations and regional consortia to sponsor legislation that did not pass in the last session, but we hope will have a lot more legs in the session coming up, that would, in the spirit of dig once and dig smart, connect along the pathway of deployment all anchor institutions. And that's the kind of policy that Congress could underscore. There's been bills introduced that talk about dig once. We love the concept of also dig smart. Let's do it now. Put in the conduit, even if somebody doesn't want to deploy right now to be in the trench, but we know where strategic corridors are. And we want to make sure we get all of the institutions connected if we're going to build to achieve the digital equity that you talk about. So as we come to the end of our conversation, I really want to go back to your personal reflections about what difference does it make in public service, in any kind of quest for digital equity or trying to achieve something else. What are the words of wisdom that you want to leave us with? The California Emerging Technology Fund, our board of directors, our partners, the people who are working so hard every day in our state to get the digitally disadvantaged online. What would you advise us to help us keep going? Mignon?
Continue your quest to fix what's broken. You are in your communities, you are of your communities, you know what people in the community are asking for, you know what the needs are. Continue to be an advocate, continue to be their voice, because sometimes they have been so disabled for so long that they do not have the energy or the wherewithal to speak up. So continue to do that. I know there are times where that exercise is exhausting. I know there are times where those efforts do not, in the short term and even in the intermediate term, that they return the dividends that you think are worthy. But every step by way of advocacy and awareness, every step helps. Every revelation and acknowledgement to ensure that those who did not know now. You will never know when that would be applied in order to meet and address the needs in which you advocate. And I'll close by saying this. We all say we want boundless opportunities, that we want seamless partnerships, that we want enhanced collaborations. That only happens if we continue to bridge, to connect, to be a voice for those who are digitally disadvantaged. So do not get weary. Take a break every now and then, but can't be a long break. And I assure you, if there's nothing else I know, every step you take in the right direction helps.
Thank you. And Rachelle, your words?
Well, I guess what I'd like to say is seize the day to the board, because I think we are at a very unusual moment right now, and we have more opportunities than we had before. So I think now is the time that CETF should go directly to the FCC, and lobbying is a little easier. You don't have to get on a plane anymore. You can just do Zoom. So I actually think it's time for us to express ourselves at the FCC. Now, right now, there could be a change in leadership. So things will really slow down at the FCC for the next couple months until the election is over and there may or may not be a new chair. There's some, there's always changes going on around an election. So we should see how that plays out. But I do think at this moment, there are a lot of opportunities at the commission on the Lifeline side, on universal service, broadband mapping. There's a rulemaking going on, and we have very strong opinions about mapping. We should get in there. And on Lifeline, we have a lot of strong opinions about amount of data, about family plans. These are really very detailed proceedings up at the FCC, but I always feel like we have to be heard or make an effort to be heard. So it isn't just the big providers with lobbyists that are heard up there. So I do think this is a time at the federal level we should be heard. I think we're doing a very good job in California. We've been stretched thin, frankly, with all the things going on at the PUC between the CASF, the Lifeline, various mergers. So it's just been a little crazy, but we have made an impact there. Absolutely, the commissioners are listening to us and they want to hear from us because they feel like we're a neutral voice. So I do think seize the day is what's going on for us for 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachelle. So seize the day, and keep in mind that just as you have been trailblazers, as I started this conversation, I want to underscore that you, Rachelle Chong, and you, Mignon Clyburn, are continuing pioneers, that there is this future opportunity working together. You've been so inspiring. It has been a true honor and privilege to just be able to join you, to hear you, to be inspired and reaffirmed by your advice. And you have done a great service for all of us in California by coming together today and having this conversation. I also want to thank you, Mignon, for earlier, a few years ago, engaging in an interview that is posted on the CETF website, so our listeners can go back and listen to Commissioner Clyburn. One of her last acts as a commissioner at the FCC, after we had that conversation, was to issue a letter to the ISPs asking them to at least report what progress they're making in signing up their low-income customers. And we appreciated that very much. Mignon, I remember all of these things. And Rachelle continues to do an extraordinary job of representing the California Emerging Technology Fund in the regulatory arena. I know we're all going to be working together in a continuing partnership, a continuing sisterhood, if I might add, as we go forward to achieve digital equity for all Californians, digital equity for all Americans. Thank you in being leaders in that quest.